I got Nikko Jenkins. I got you.
He's had power over my life for 4 years, and I've struggled for 4 years.
50 years to run consecutive to all murder convictions at counts 1, 4, 7.
In the shadows of prison walls, some inmates inspire terror unlike any other.
Colombia's most wanted drug lord, captured. After more than a decade on the run, this fugitive didn't seem fazed by the cameras.
Their notorious acts of violence and chilling histories make them the most feared men behind bars. For the first time, we're catching a glimpse of these infamous figures caught on camera. Men whose crimes sent shivers down the spines of both the public and their fellow inmates.
He was the world's most wanted drug trafficker. For decades, the ruthless Joaquim El Chapo Guzman destroyed millions of lives and reaped billions of dollars.
Silverstein went to prison back in '78 for armed robbery. He was later found guilty of killing a prison guard and 2 inmates at a federal pen in Indiana. While those murders inspired the design of the Supermax prison here in Florence, Colorado.
Thomas Edward Silverstein was born on February 4, 1952, in Long Beach, California. From a young age, he faced challenges that would shape his notorious life. His mother, Virginia Conway, divorced her first husband while pregnant and later married Thomas Conway, whom Silverstein believed to be his biological father. After this marriage ended, Virginia married Sid Silverstein, who legally adopted Thomas. Growing up in a middle-class neighborhood, Silverstein was shy and often bullied. Virginia instilled in him a harsh lesson. If he came home crying after a fight, he would face punishment from her. This taught him to stand up for himself, albeit in a way that would lead to a lifetime of violence. At just 19 years old, Silverstein was incarcerated for armed robbery, serving 4 years in San Quentin prison. However, his brief taste of freedom was short-lived. He soon found himself arrested again, this time with family members for multiple armed robberies. And in 1977, he was sentenced to 15 years in prison, ending up at the United States Penitentiary in Leavenworth, Kansas. Here, he became associated with the Aryan Brotherhood, a neo-Nazi gang notorious for its violent criminal activities. In 1980, Silverstein's life took a darker turn when he was convicted of murdering an inmate, Danny Atwell, who had allegedly refused to smuggle heroin into the prison. This conviction landed him a life sentence, leading to his transfer to the high-security facility at USP Marion, Illinois, where he lived under constant surveillance. His life there was marked by violence and further infamy. He received additional life sentences for murdering other inmates and even a correction officer. The most shocking of these incidents was the brutal stabbing of correction officer Merle Cutts, orchestrated by Silverstein himself with the help of fellow inmates. By the time he passed away on May 11, 2019, Silverstein had spent 36 years in solitary confinement, solidifying his reputation as one of the most feared inmates in the U.S. prison system. He died due to complications from heart surgery, leaving behind a legacy of violence and brutality. Now this prisoner in the image was known as the Titan. He towered over even the toughest officers with chains around his waist that struck fear into the bravest hearts. Stories about his past, crimes so terrible they were hard to believe. Let us know if this is the first time you've seen him like this. Nikko Allen Jenkins, born on September 16, 1986, in Omaha, Nebraska, is a name that sends shivers down the spine of many. His early life was marred by violence, and after a series of tumultuous events, he found himself in prison for carjacking, serving just over 10 years. Unfortunately, Jenkins' mental health issues went largely unaddressed during his incarceration, leaving him to grapple with his demons alone. Upon his release on July 30, 2013, the lack of supervision would prove catastrophic. Just 2 weeks after regaining his freedom, Jenkins embarked on a chilling killing spree that shook Omaha to its core. He lured two men, 26-year-old Juan Ube Pana and 25-year-old Jorge Cajiga Ruiz, to a secluded area under the pretense of an encounter. In a shocking act of brutality, he shot both men in the head and robbed them, leaving their bodies abandoned in a pickup truck. Jenkins didn't stop there. His third victim was a fellow inmate named Curtis Bradford, who he murdered just a day after taking a friendly photo with him. Jenkins' most heinous act came when he shot 33-year-old Andrea Kruger, a mother of three, with a 12-gauge shotgun, leaving her lifeless on the road. The grisly nature of his crimes was captured on surveillance footage, leading to his capture on August 30, 2013. During an extensive interrogation, Jenkins offered a chilling confession, claiming that he was influenced by an ancient serpent god named Apis, adding a bizarre twist to an already horrific tale. His trial was a spectacle of unpredictability. Jenkins chose to represent himself, often acting erratically, speaking in tongues, and laughing during the testimonies of his victims' families. Ultimately, he was sentenced to death, sparking a renewed debate about the treatment of inmates with mental health issues in the correctional system. For many, Jenkins became a symbol of terror, with the echoes of his actions reverberating through the community and leaving families shattered and grieving.
Authorities in Colombia say they've captured the country's most wanted drug trafficker. The feared leader of a major drug cartel, Dairo Antonio Usuga, had been on the run for more than a decade.
Known as Otoniel, the former Colombian drug lord may be locked up in ADX Florence, but his name still sends chills down the streets of Colombia. Born into deep poverty, O'Connell was drawn to violence early on. At just 18, he joined the People's Liberation Army, a guerrilla group fighting for the poor against the government. However, 2 years later, the group signed a peace deal, ending their violent struggle. Displeased and craving the chaos of war, the 20-year-old O'Connell joined the far-right paramilitary and drug trafficking group, Autodefensas Unidas de Colombia, plunging deeper into a life of drugs and violence. O'Connell steadily climbed the ranks, and his ruthless, no-nonsense reputation caught the attention of top commanders and rival leaders. In 2005, Daniel Rendon Herrera, leader of the Los Urbanos drug cartel, recruited O'Connell and his brother Giovanni as his second-in-command. But 4 years later, Rendon was captured, leaving the Usuga brothers in charge. After Giovanni was ambushed during a police raid, O'Connell became the sole leader of the cartel, later renamed the Gulf Clan. Federal prosecutors in New York described him as the most violent and significant Colombian drug trafficker since Pablo Escobar, and he was recognized as the Gulf Clan's supreme leader. O'Connell expanded the cartel's operations, regularly shipping large amounts of cocaine to the United States, orchestrating the deaths of hundreds of police officers and committing numerous other crimes, including the horrific abuse of minors. Despite the efforts of Colombian and US authorities, capturing him proved nearly impossible. Over 132 arrest warrants were issued, but he remained untouchable. In 2015, a US-backed task force of 1,200 anti-drug officers was created, armed with financing and advanced weapons. Still, O'Connell eluded them. In one encounter, his men shot down a Colombian police helicopter, killing 10 officers. 2 years later, the US State Department offered a $5 million reward for information leading to his capture. In response, O'Connell released a video on Facebook claiming he wanted to negotiate with law enforcement. When ignored, he ramped up his drug trafficking operations, becoming a near-mythical figure in the criminal underworld. Luck finally turned in favor of Colombian intelligence in 2021 when they discovered O'Connell was hiding in the Yoruba region of northwestern Colombia near the Panamanian border. His location was uncovered after tracking cartel members delivering a specific medication for his kidney disease. On October 22, 2021, a military team codenamed El Blanco launched a massive operation involving 100 troops, 20 helicopters, and 10 drones. They blocked rivers and roads to cut off escape routes while Navy ships patrolled the coast. The next day, O'Connell was captured in a remote mountainous area. At the time, he was Colombia's most wanted drug lord with an $800,000 bounty on his head. Even while in captivity and his cartel weakened, O'Toniel gave them orders to continue trafficking drugs. To everyone's surprise, in February 2022, during a hearing with the Special Jurisdiction for Peace, Swing O'Toniel revealed that he had organized his surrender and collaborated with the Colombian army. However, police interrupted the session, accusing him of planning an escape. Recordings of his testimony were later stolen. Fearing O'Toniel's influence in Colombia, authorities extradited him to the United States on May 4, 2022, marking the end of his reign as one of Colombia's most infamous drug lords. O'Donnell pleaded guilty in New York to leading a violent cartel and paramilitary group, sealing his fate for decades in prison. He was sentenced to 45 years behind bars and was ordered to pay $216 million fine. According to U.S. District Judge Dora Irizarry, O'Donnell trafficked nearly 100,000 kilograms of cocaine into the U.S. and was extraordinary among drug dealers, even surpassing the notorious Pablo Escobar in scale. Given his track record of ordering the brutal hit on Colombian police officers, soldiers, and civilians, the feds could not risk him possibly influencing certain actions on American soil. So the court decreed that he is to serve his sentence at ADX Florence. While O'Tonio is one of the most powerful drug lords, even he can't match the kingpin who treats prison like a revolving door coming and going whenever he pleases. This list wouldn't be complete without him. Michael Gordon Peterson, popularly known as Charles Bronson, was born on December 6, 1952. He is notorious for being one of the most feared figures in British prison history. His story begins with a tumultuous childhood that laid the groundwork for his later violent tendencies. Even as a young man, Bronson exhibited an inclination for aggression, engaging in street fights that cemented his reputation as a formidable combatant. His transition into the criminal underworld escalated dramatically in 1974 when he attempted to rob a post office in Luton. Armed with a sawed-off shotgun, Bronson found himself in a violent shootout with police, injuring several officers before his eventual capture. The ensuing trial showcased not only his erratic behavior, but also his complete disdain for authority. He disrupted court proceedings, assaulted prison guards, and exhibited explosive outbursts that earned him a reputation as an unpredictable and dangerous criminal. Due to his violent conduct, he was deemed mentally unstable and transferred to Broadmoor, a high-security psychiatric hospital. However, even within those walls, Bronson's aggressive nature persisted as he assaulted fellow patients and attempted hostage situations. It was during his time at Broadmoor that he adopted the name Charles Bronson, inspired by the Hollywood actor, reflecting his desire for a more significant persona. As his notoriety grew, so did the security measures taken to contain him. Bronson was shuffled through various maximum security prisons, including Parkhurst and Wakefield, each time under stringent protocols to manage his violent outbursts. Despite facing harsh conditions, Bronson turned his confinement into a path of physical transformation and creative expression, authoring a book titled Solitary Fitness that offered insights into his life and fitness routines. His infamy culminated in 1998 with a dramatic hostage situation at HMP Birmingham, where he held 2 inmates at gunpoint, demanding a helicopter for his escape. The standoff lasted for hours, showcasing his audacity and the chaos he could create even in confinement. Today, he remains a symbol of defiance within the prison system, leaving a legacy that is both feared and fascinating. Now this prisoner in the image was known as the Titan. He towered over even the toughest officers, with chains around his waist that struck fear into the bravest hearts, stories about his past, crimes so terrible they were hard to believe. Let us know if this is the first time you've seen him like this. Richard Lee McNair, born on December 19, 1958, is not your typical criminal. His criminal career is highlighted by a series of daring prison escapes that have earned him a place in infamy. McNair's journey into the criminal world began with a botched robbery that led to a murder conviction in 1987. Rather than resigning himself to a life behind bars, McNair became obsessed with escape, showcasing a remarkable talent for evading capture that would soon become the stuff of legend. His first escape was nothing short of a magician's trick. McNair managed to slip out of his handcuffs using only lip balm and sheer willpower. Although recaptured, this initial feat only fueled his desire for freedom. 4 years later, he executed a second escape, this time navigating through ventilation shafts like a ghost slipping through the night. But it was his third escape in April 2006 that solidified his status as a master of evasion. In a brazen act, McNair concealed himself among stacks of used postal mailbags, leaving law enforcement baffled. When an officer finally spotted him while jogging near railroad tracks, McNair was quick on his feet, concocting a story about merely exercising and claiming he was staying at a nearby hotel. His ability to think on his feet allowed him to slip through the cracks yet again, and he even made his way into Canada, where he continued to evade the authorities. McNair's escapades caught the attention of law enforcement, landing him on Canada's 15 most wanted list multiple times. However, his luck ran out in late 2007 when an observant officer recognized a suspicious van, leading to a chase that ultimately ended with McNair's capture. Today, he resides in ADX Florence, a supermax prison known for its strict security measures, where inmates spend 23 hours a day in isolation. Despite his current situation, McNair's legacy as a cunning escape artist continues to capture the imagination of many, embodying the notion that some criminals are always one step ahead of the law.
In the blood-soaked world of international drug cartels, for the top cops of U.S. law enforcement, Joaquin Guzman was public enemy number one.
The name Joaquin Archivaldo Guzman Loera might not sound familiar, but mentions El Chapo, and it grabs everyone's attention. Guzman, known by the nickname El Chapo,
He was the world's most wanted drug trafficker. For decades, the ruthless Joaquin El Chapo Guzman destroyed millions of lives and reaped billions of dollars.
This former Mexican drug lord and leader of the Sinaloa cartel is believed to be responsible for the deaths of over 34,000 people. Born into a poor family in Sinaloa, El Chapo grew up surrounded by the drug trade. His father, involved in the business to support the family, introduced young Guzman to the world of growing marijuana for local dealers. By the late 1970s, Guzman had learned the trade inside out. He joined Hector Luis Palma Salazar, a rising drug lord, helping map out drug routes through Sinaloa and into the US. Later, he worked for Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo, one of Mexico's top kingpins in the 1980s. But with all his knowledge and ambition, Guzman wasn't content to work under someone else. So when Felix was arrested in 1988, Guzman started his own cartel. Under Guzman's leadership, the Sinaloa cartel gained immense power and wealth. Forbes even ranked him as one of the most powerful people in the world from 2009 to 2013, while the DEA compared his influence and fortune to Pablo Escobar's. As the leader of the cartel, Guzman believed there were no limits to how much he could move and where he could sell them. He oversaw the production and trafficking of massive amounts of cocaine, methamphetamine, marijuana, and heroin, smuggling them into the US and Europe, the world's biggest drug markets. El Chapo was feared for his extreme violence toward his enemies, but what made him truly dangerous was his ability to move vast amounts of drugs and escape the authorities time and time again. Guzman was first caught in 1993 in Guatemala and sent to prison in Mexico for drug trafficking and murder.
He used money, violence, and gee-whiz escapes worthy of a James Bond villain to avoid capture.
But in 2001, he used bribes to escape from a high-security prison. What made him so hard to catch and different from other drug dealers was his use of tunnels. El Chapo became famous for building secret passageways under the border that allowed him to smuggle tons of drugs into the US.
Suffice it to say that whoever built this tunnel, probably not their first try.
There's some expertise and experience here.
In 1990, federal agents found one of his tunnels in Douglas, Arizona. The tunnel was 300 feet long and included lights, electricity, and even a hydraulic lift under the floor of a safe house. It was so advanced that agents compared it to something from a James Bond movie. The bathtub was equipped with a hydraulic lift. It's been turned off. The tunnels were expensive and took months to build, but they were highly effective. They were big enough to carry multiple tons of drugs at a time, and many were dug so deep that ground radar couldn't detect them. The entrances were often hidden in plain sight, like one that started beneath a bathroom floor. El Chapo didn't only use tunnels for smuggling. In 2014, after being arrested, he escaped from a high-security prison by crawling through a tunnel hidden beneath his bathtub. Authorities tracked him down days later in Mazatlan, but he quickly escaped again through an even bigger tunnel, almost a mile long, leading to a nearby farmhouse. This time, he used a motorcycle to travel through the tunnel in under 10 minutes. Despite the celebrations in Sinaloa after his escape,
the near-mythic tale of El Chapo brought crashing down by an army of law enforcement agencies.
El Chapo's freedom didn't last long. A few months later, he was captured again after a fierce gunfight in Los Mochis, Sinaloa. Though he managed to escape once more, this time through a tunnel hidden behind a mirror, authorities caught him shortly after he tried to flee through a manhole. He was extradited to the US and is now facing time in ADX Florence. The authorities take his security so seriously that they even shut down the Brooklyn Bridge when moving him between his jail cell and the courthouse. Even while behind bars, El Chapo still pulls strings. In 2018, 2 more tunnels were found on the US-Mexico border. One connected to the back of an old KFC in Arizona and the other in California, where authorities discovered an unfinished tunnel with solar-powered electricity and ventilation systems. While El Chapo's reign left a trail of destruction, he wasn't the type to get his hands dirty in the bloodbaths. Charles Edmund Cullen is perhaps one of the most chilling examples of betrayal in a profession dedicated to healing. As a nurse operating across various New Jersey hospitals, Cullen hid his heinous crimes behind the trusted guise of caring for the sick. Over the span of 16 years, he confessed to taking the lives of 40 patients with 29 confirmed murders. The thought of someone tasked with saving lives instead of ending them is a haunting realization that sent shockwaves through the healthcare community. Cullen's nightmarish saga began to unravel on December 12, 2003, when he was finally arrested. Initially facing charges for 1 murder and 1 attempted murder, the gravity of his crimes soon became apparent. During interrogation, Cullen confessed to killing 2 patients at Somerset Medical Center, and he ominously hinted that the actual number of his victims could be as high as 40. The courtroom drama escalated as he displayed no remorse for his actions, even taunting the judge during proceedings. In April 2004, Cullen pleaded guilty to 13 murders and 2 attempted murders, all committed through lethal injections. In a controversial plea deal, prosecutors spared him the death penalty in exchange for his cooperation. As part of this deal, Cullen agreed to help identify more of his victims, shedding light on the disturbing question of how a person could betray the very oath to do no harm. On March 2, 2006, he was sentenced to 11 consecutive life sentences, and he now remains incarcerated in New Jersey State Prison in Trenton, with no chance of parole until he reaches the age of 443. His legacy serves as a dark reminder of the fragility of trust in environments meant to foster healing. Alvin Francis Karpus, born Albin Francis Karpovichis on August 10, 1907, was a Canadian-American criminal of Lithuanian descent whose life of crime began at a young age. By the time he was 10, Karpus was mingling with gamblers, bootleggers, and various shady characters. His formal entry into the criminal world came at 19 when he was sentenced to 10 years in prison for attempted burglary. However, Karpus managed to escape and teamed up with fellow inmates to continue his life of crime, including a notorious partnership with Fred Barker at the Kansas State Penitentiary. Together, they formed the infamous Barker-Karpus gang, specializing in bank heists, kidnappings, and violent crime. Karpus quickly gained a reputation for ruthlessness, particularly after the gang's involvement in the killing of Sheriff C. Roy Kelly, which further cemented his status as a formidable figure in organized crime. The Barker-Karpus gang's reign of terror came to a swift end in 1936, following a series of escalating violent encounters with law enforcement. Their capture was highly publicized, particularly after the kidnapping of Edward Bremer, which drew the attention of President Franklin Roosevelt and intensified the FBI's manhunt for Karpus and his gang. After being apprehended on May 1, 1936 in New Orleans, Karpus faced a swift trial and was sentenced to life imprisonment. He spent an astonishing 26 years in Alcatraz, where he became known as one of the longest-serving inmates. Released on parole in 1969, Karpus faced a world that had drastically changed since he was imprisoned. No longer feared as a criminal mastermind, he struggled to adapt to life outside prison walls. Eventually deported to Canada, he faced challenges due to his previous criminal record, which prevented him from securing a passport. In search of a quiet life, he moved to Spain, where he passed away on August 26, 1979. Initially deemed a suicide, his death was later determined to be due to natural causes, closing the chapter on a life defined by crime and notoriety.